Opening slide, graphic text. Focus on the good things of life. Title: Imitation as a Method of Learning. Image of John Armstrong. Logos, belonging matters and talksthatmatter.net.
All right, we're talking about imitation today, and the reason for that is that in this group we've wanted to pick up some of the themes of SRV that aren't taught in our 2-day workshop, so that in a sense we bring you up to speed with the other things that we think about when we're ever implementing social role valorization. And the nice thing with imitation too, it illustrates that aspect that the themes are connected. For instance, the developmental model is a theme that seeks the growth and learning of people. There's also the theme to do with interpersonal identification, which I don't think we've done yet, but we will. And here we see imitation being a sub-theme of the developmental model, but it's also connected to interpersonal identification, because we tend to imitate people we identify with. We don't imitate people we don't identify with. We kind of run from those as models. We think they're awful. I don't want to copy that. But if we identify with someone, our innate capacity to imitate is so built in that we will even start imitating people without even thinking about it, simply because we admire them or identify them in some way, and we'll start picking up all sorts of subtle little movements. And in 1987, Michael Kendrick was here in Australia for 6 months. We realized that we hadn't been teaching SRV to the fullness that was available, and we fixed all of that up. But I saw Michael presenting so often and heard him so much that I started, my friends realized, do you realize that you're swaying in the way that Michael does? And I hadn't even picked that up, which was and I stopped it immediately. But that's the kind of thing. You see someone, you like what you're hearing, you like the nature of you identify with them, and all of a sudden you find yourself doing all sorts of subtle things that they do, and you might not be aware of it. So I'm going to go now to screen share. And so we want to talk about the power of imitation. And this too links with another theme of SRV to do with being conscious and more conscious of what it is we do. And so like imitation can be unconscious, what happens if we consciously seek to be good models and seek good models for the people that we support, so that we bring consciousness to bear, given that so much devaluation and wounding occurs unconsciously. One of the ways of stopping ourselves with that is to be much more aware of what we say and what we do, what we wear, and all sorts of things to do with our performance. So this doesn't take very long. So let's have a little look. But again, it's kind of stating the obvious, but again, that we are more conscious of it. And therefore, we want to use imitation here in a really positive and powerful way, because we want to use it deliberately. So imitation seems to be built into human nature. We seem to be hardwired to take notice of other things. And that's a good adaptive feature as well. I think, because it's a bit like if you travel overseas, your ability to imitate means that you might just be able to follow how people pay to get on this bus or catch a train or purchase food. And it's just that you're watching and then you imitate. And so it has those adaptive aspects to it and can get us out of trouble and through tough spots. And so even from very young age, you see this preparedness to imitate. I think my wife Lynn here is actually imitating our 2 granddaughters here, rather than the other way around. But you can see a kind of feedback loop then between the observer and the other people in the scene in observing the actions. And of course, we incorporate that in a lot of children's play, nursery rhymes, songs, movements, and so on. And so, and the power of the unconscious in terms of imitation as well is that you don't always pick up the subtlety of what it is we're modeling to someone else. It's one of the earliest and most primitive of learning mechanisms. So this starts at a very young age. And of course, in a lot of our interaction between children, and here we have Meg Sweeney with our granddaughter Kess, who was very young when this photo was taken. And just see the exaggerated movement with Meg as well, as she's talking with Kess and inviting Kess to imitate the sound and the movement and her mouth and so on. So we have a natural way, it seems, of appropriately exaggerating the thing the person is to take notice of. And this is a nice, important strategy, because sometimes one of the reasons people with intellectual disability don't always imitate well is that they're not sure what it is you have to imitate. If lots of stuff is happening, what is it you have to imitate? So from a teaching point of view, sometimes you have to lift that bit out a bit, make it a little bit more stronger without making it too crazy, for the person, this is the thing you're supposed to take notice of. So that's a very interesting point as well. And but there from the very beginning. And they're extremely powerful. So it's one of those ways that it's just easy to teach people. And in fact, the video that you all liked from the last session about Jack was largely based on imitation, of watching the task be done and then copying it very soon afterwards, with minimal verbal prompts for that. So it was the actions that were being imitated, not any vocal explanation. And so it serves adaptive functions most of the time, but it does have a downside. And the downside is, of course, if someone encounters people who are poor models, and so it's found that peer group behavior tends to emerge because of the nature of the peer group. And so I think there was one study that said if a person would likely to take up marijuana smoking, it's only about 5% if none of their peers did. But if their peers smoked marijuana, it was something like 92% chance that they would take up smoking marijuana. So there's a downside. You want to belong, then you'll perhaps start doing things that actually aren't necessarily very adaptive or even very healthy for you. And that's the downside. And that's a particular danger for people who are devalued, who are often then placed with other devalued people, is that they may be surrounded by poor models. And maybe the only models they ever have are other people who aren't very competent. And so not only affects their image, but may affect their competencies as well. And then the final one here, it says, in childhood, the process of imitation and role-playing come together within that as well. So here's a bit of a table for us to have a look at, that there are just a number of things that we might think of as we analyze how imitation occurs. So we've got on the left-hand side the demonstrator and the model and what kind of identity they have. And then we have on the right-hand side, of course, the learner, the one who's going to be, we hope, do the imitating, and what identity features they have. And then we'll see some links between the two of them. So the first one on the left, of course, is that, well, we need one or more real persons or facsimiles. And here facsimile means that we can sometimes learn from fictional characters on TV, films, and books that we see as well. And we know that can be very powerful. People who follow Elvis, for instance, and meet in parks once a year because they're still imitating, the person they admired. It's like a facsimile that they're imitating. And then on the other side, we see a number of features for the imitator to take most advantage from. And that one, it incorporates an awareness of the environment, including awareness of other people and how they behave, and has capacity to imitate, at least in approximation. So I don't always have to get that. You might say learning is an ever closer approximation to the efficient end product. And so we start out imitating fairly clumsily, and we start to bring it into line. getting better and better. Of course, there's the opportunity to imitate, and that might mean that there's frequent opportunity, sufficient intensity of opportunity to imitate as well. And notice this one has a positive view of and identification with the model. So there's that interpersonal identification now running across into this learning opportunity, that when you identify with someone, you tend to imitate, you want to imitate them. So there's that motivational aspect we talked about last time, and even admires and values and aspires the characteristics of the model. Man, that's really powerful. And you might have heard me tell a story of a man in a group home who was 35 and he couldn't do his shoelaces up. But there was a staff member who was 35 and that this man really admired. They just clicked off together, and this man wanted to be more and more like this guy, this staff member, in the way he dressed, the way he talked. And so the gentleman in the group home wanted and actually needed a new pair of sneakers. And he'd always had just the slip-ons because he couldn't do his laces up. And he said, no, he wanted a pair of shoes just like the worker. And he was quite adamant about that. And as a result of getting shoes just like the worker, he learned to do up his laces at the age of 35. And he was successful because he so wanted to be like this man and be like the things this man could do. And some of that was to look like him, even down to the shoes and clothes he wore, but also to then be able to manipulate them properly. So we see these impacts. So we have to have enough models that are present in sufficient numbers that is around the imitator's perceptual field that they can see. And again, sometimes for devalued people, they don't get many valued models, but when they are in the company of valued people, you see how much a richer imitatory environment that is for them. And especially because if they're valued people, they might be doing things hopefully in valued ways. That allows the person to see multiple examples of people performing. And a bit like we went out to dinner on Friday evening with Milton, and there are lots of models about mostly good behavior. And so if anyone was needing to learn how to do that, to select food from a menu, to go and put in the order, to receive the order, to eat it appropriately, there were lots of models there. And then, of course, the model keeps performing it, perhaps repeatedly, habitually, and appropriately, even exaggeratedly at times, so that the person can see. And many teachers, even in informal arrangements, like one of our granddaughters is learning to do crochet, and just seeing the way one of our friends has been teaching her to crochet, and how showing her the movement, it's just a little bit exaggerated, so she can see this is how you go around and pick it up and so on. And so the imitator sees what's going on, and then if necessary, you have a go. And we saw that with Jack, the waiting, and then in a sense getting just this subtle cue, go for it. And off he went. So that's an interesting aspect. And some of the people you might know might need that just a prompt, and it might not necessarily be verbal, but a visual prompt that allows the person to know you have a go. And that's a pretty exciting part. You mean I get to handle the vacuum cleaner, I get to stir the pot, I get to cut the veggies with this sharp knife, and so on. And then, of course, they're reinforced, and that's where some feedback might occur from the model. Well, you've just about got that, but don't forget this bit, and then there's some more demonstration. Now, sometimes models need to be a bit reinforced because it can get tiring having someone imitate you all the time, and like, following on, and they need a bit of reinforcement as well occasionally, which may come from third parties, and then the imitator may even rehearse the imitation. This can take many forms. I once saw a young woman on a bus who was rehearsing the next buses that she had to catch to get home. She worked at a cafe at a very large shopping centre and was very competent in her work, but she was verbally rehearsing the 302. I wait for the 302. And so she was even rehearsing her preparation for what it was that she was then needing to do. And rehearsal is a terrific way. It's another form of imitation, you might say, getting ready for the task by rehearsing it. And again, that might take even just thinking about it. And we often do that in bed of a morning. It may even worry us a bit that we start thinking of all the things I need to do today. And you can really worry about it in bed. And then when you get up, it's like your mind is clear and say, oh yeah, I'll get through that. That's no big deal. And we're kind of let off the hook. Two forms of imitation to think about. This might be new for you. We might just think, see and do it. That's all it is. But there's two aspects of this. One is the level at where we're learning and acquiring a competency about what to do. And then the next level is that we actually perform it. And so this acquisition modeling, then often learning how to acquire the behavior and or role that we're fulfilling. What's the process of learning that? And so acquisition modeling. So often the modeling is teaching someone how to do it for the first time. Here, watch, this is how I do it. And off we go. And so the person learns that. But there's a second layer to do with then performing it. We have a young friend who's acquired the ability to brush his teeth, but he doesn't brush his teeth. And his parents are quite worried about what this is going to do to his teeth over time. So they've tried to pair it with when you get into your pajamas, then you brush your teeth. So they've tried to put it with another behavior that he does do. So just remember, you put on your pajamas, then you brush your teeth. And what they're having to model that for him as well. Now, he's already acquired toothbrushing reasonably competently, but he doesn't have the habit for doing it and will go to bed without doing it. And so that too requires some modeling. And I mentioned earlier about people learning something until it's mastery. And sometimes the mastery is in actually doing it, the performance of that task, not just the acquisition of that skill, of doing it again and again. And that helps to structure our life. And it means that we don't have to make too many decisions about it either. So here's a bit of a cartoon. The magician did it with a table full of dishes. So the patients ended up on the floor. But that's his performance modeling without acquisition modeling. And this also reminds me, some of you may have heard this story of our daughter learning to drive, who got into the car, thought she'd back it down the driveway, but put it in the wrong gear and drove through the garage door. So she too hadn't acquired the proper skill, even though she was trying to perform it. And so you try and get the right order here. So you don't want people driving before they have the prerequisite skills, and don't want people doing things too early. So our final overhead, and then I'll open it up for some discussion, and you may want me to go back over some things, just yell out, is that in some ways SRV is just alerting us to the existence of imitation in order to use it more effectively, because it's been there all along and we may do it, but we may have also underestimated just how powerful it is, and we want to make sure that we do that. Of course, we start to take notice even in our own life, being mindful of the contributions and inspiration of great models. And so, we might think the Feststrict was a feature of people celebrating a model that they had in their life and the inspiration that provided. And Wolf is not the only model, of course. He did a great job, but we may have others in our lives, and realize that being a great model is such a wonderful thing to have in your own life. Is who do you model your own life after? Another feature is then identify what to model. What is it that is needed to be modeled here, and sometimes drawing that out a little bit. There was a gentleman in a cafe that used to, small group that used to go for coffee every fortnight. And for their money, they could get 2 donuts. It was probably not a very good dietary supplement, but he'd eat his first donut. The donuts were big and people could go back and get their second one. And he could see that everybody had their second donut, but he didn't know how to go and get that. He didn't know what you had to do. And so he'd start hitting himself in the head. The young instructor with them thought maybe he doesn't know how to get the second donut. And so sitting in front of him, she modeled that for him, and she exaggerated a bit. Particularly, it's a very noisy cafe. How is he going to pick out from all of that noise the bit he's supposed to take notice of? And so she had to, oh, I've forgotten my donut, making sure she's got eye contact with him. She grabs her plate. I think I'll get another one. And she making sure, and she exaggerates a little, not too much to make it too crazy, but goes up to the counter with him watching, put the donut on the plate, come back, sit down. And then, of course, he gets up and does the same thing. He doesn't have to hit himself in the head. So in a sense, identifying out of all the things going on in that cafe, for him at this point, what's the thing that we need to model for him? And then that means too, sometimes letting others in on what it is that should be modeled. What is it this person is acquiring, and what kind of modeling might they be instructed to provide with respect to that? And just a zillion things that might involve. And so discern good models. And of course, along with discerning good models, it implies pick up bad models, pick up the existence of bad models. And so we want, given that people are already devalued and already at risk of having poor modeling in their life, perhaps a lifetime of poor modeling, then providing people, we value them by providing the best models possible. And of course, that means that we too have to be good models. So because people are vulnerable, surround them then with good models, and so protect people from exposure to bad modeling. Now, there'd be some people whose ideologies would disagree with that position. You know, it's up for people to choose and all of that stuff. But if I've had a lifetime of bad modeling, I'd like to try the good ones on for size now. For instance, in institutions, around 96% of people in an institution smoked. And around the same figure as staff smoked. And this is in the days when you could smoke at work. And I remember walking into some of these wards and you could barely see people because of the cloud of smoke that existed. So even when they closed and moved into group homes, the same thing, everybody smoked because there was nothing else to do. And so both staff and residents would smoke, basically chain smoke, which was just, terrible, and pushed out, you might say, other possibilities for things to do. And now here's a very important one, that when you go into a situation a person's never encountered before, that is, it's equivocal. It's not unequivocal. It's equivocal. It's ambiguous. It's very, I don't know what to expect here. Therefore, you need to have the positive models in place from the start, because we know that learners are really attentive. All of us are attentive to situations we've never been in before. So I'm going to be watching. So you sometimes have to make sure who's ever in that environment that they're clear that they need to model that good behavior, and from the start, because if this person picks up bad behavior at the start, it may be almost impossible to change that later. It gets embedded very quickly. So you have to have good behavior from the start. And remember going into a regular high school, and where there were some students in the high school who had disabilities, and we were seeing the environments that they were accessing, what the classes were like, what the teaching was like. And we encountered some classrooms that were just wild. And this is going back in the 90s, mid-90s, where in a computing class, there were kids walking over desks and on computers. And we were kind of, wow. this ain't great. and yet that's what the regular school had on offer. Now, not all regular schools are like that, but it shows sometimes that you've got to do your homework in advance just to see that the modeling, can we get the modeling right here? Because there's a lot riding on this. And then, of course, people's identification with persons who are good models. So you want to promote that. And sometimes that's a very natural force, like the man with the shoelaces. And then, of course, rehearse and reinforce positive imitation. And so be a good model oneself in everything that you do, workers, advocates, families, and the public, of course, because the public are watching us. And they too will be modeling off the way we engage and interact with people. There was a program, a day program, who had a man in it who used to eat cigarette butts. And often he would just have a few butts in the community and then he'd move on and be more or less available for what next happened. But the program took a zero kind of approach to this, so that if he ate one single butt, they would throw him to the ground and put their hand in his mouth and yell at him, "That's a dirty, filthy habit." And they would do that in the shopping mall. And it's actually a local story. And it's a very dangerous thing to do, is to put your hand in someone's mouth. And the thing was, this man was profoundly deaf as well. And so he couldn't hear what they were saying to him and what they were doing. And yet it attracted probably not particularly positive modeling and imitation in that instance. So, dearie me.
Closing slide graphic text with thanks to John Armstrong. Web address johnarmstrong.media. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change and our materials for reference only. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Ngunnawal people. Logos, Belonging Matters and TalksThatMatter.net.